She was just a black girl in hand-me-down clothes, mocked by her teacher for her funny accent. In front of the whole class, she was humiliated and disrespected, her eyes filling with tears. But what nobody knew, her father was the new ambassador, a man who could pick up the phone and call the Pentagon itself. And when he finally walked through that door, the entire school would be stunned, jaws dropped, and speechless, as justice was served. Before we find out what happens next, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if this story is already hitting home, smash that like button. It really helps. The air in the classroom was cold, a biting chill that had nothing to do with the late autumn weather outside. It was a Monday morning, a time that already felt heavy with the week to come. But inside Mr. Kent Douglas's history class, the atmosphere was frozen with a special kind of dread. Mr. Douglas stood at the front of the room, a man whose posture seemed permanently fixed in a state of looking down on others. His shirts were always crisp, his shoes always shined, but his eyes held a dull, dismissive glaze. He scanned the room, his lips curled into a faint, unpleasant smile, like a predator choosing its meal. His gaze landed on a girl in the third row, Amara Brooke. She was quiet, with eyes that seemed to hold deep pools of thought, and she always tried to make herself as small as possible in her seat. Her clothes were simple, neat, but clearly not new, and she carried herself with a shy stillness that Mr. Douglas mistook for weakness. He saw her not as a student, but as a target. "Miss Brooks," he called out, his voice slicing through the silence. "Let's have you read the next passage, page 47. The part about the Gilded Age." A collective, silent breath was held by the students around her. They knew what was coming. They had seen this show before. Amara's heart gave a painful little jump against her ribs. She looked down at the textbook, the words suddenly blurring. Her hands, resting on the worn wooden desk, felt clammy. She hated reading aloud, not because she couldn't read. She was a voracious reader, consuming books in the quiet of her small room, but because she knew her voice was different. Her family had moved from the Deep South just a few months ago, and the soft, rolling cadence of her speech was a world away from the clipped, flat tones of this northern city. "Yes, sir," she whispered, her voice barely a tremor in the tense air. She cleared her throat and began to read. The late 19th century was a period of immense economic change. She stumbled on the word economic, her tongue feeling thick and clumsy. It was a small hesitation, a tiny slip that most teachers would have ignored or gently corrected. But Mr. Douglas wasn't most teachers. He pounced. He threw his head back and let out a short, barking laugh that was devoid of any real humor. "Economic," he repeated, stretching the word out, twisting it into something ugly. "What kind of language is that? Is that how they teach you to speak where you're from?" Some students in the back snickered, the sound like cracking ice. Amara felt a hot, prickling sensation creep up her neck and spread across her cheeks. Her face was on fire. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. "Maybe," Mr. Douglas continued, leaning forward on his desk, his eyes glinting with a mean-spirited power. "You should try speaking proper English next time, Miss Brooks. This is an advanced history class, not a barnyard." The snickers grew into open laughter. It echoed around the room, each chuckle a tiny, sharp stone being thrown at her. Amara froze completely. A chilling stillness fell over her. She could feel every eye in the room on her, some filled with pity, others with cruel amusement. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The book in her hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy. The words on the page were just black squiggles, meaningless and mocking. In that moment, she wasn't a student. She was a spectacle, a source of entertainment for a man who enjoyed the feeling of his own superiority. At that exact moment, the school principal, Mr. Harris, was walking down the hallway. He was a man who preferred paperwork to people, a man who navigated the complexities of his job by avoiding conflict at all costs. He paused by the open classroom door, his ears catching the wave of laughter and Mr. Douglas's sharp, mocking tone. He saw the scene inside, the teacher puffed up with arrogance, and the young black girl, stock-still in her seat, her face a mask of burning shame. The principal's hand hovered near the doorknob. He knew he should step in. He knew this was wrong, but stepping in would mean a confrontation. It would mean paperwork. It would mean upsetting Mr. Douglas. a tenured teacher with a loud voice, at union meetings. So, Mr. Harris did what he always did. Nothing. He took a small step back from the doorway, his face carefully blank, and continued on his way down the hall, the sound of laughter chasing him. Inside the room, Amara looked like just another underestimated black girl, powerless and humiliated. Her eyes, which a moment ago held only shame, began to fill with hot tears. She blinked them back fiercely, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry, but on the inside she felt something break. Mr. Douglas was not finished. He felt a surge of power, the kind a small man feels when he exercises his authority over someone who cannot fight back. The silence that followed the laughter was his stage, and he was ready for his next act. He straightened up, clasping his hands behind his back, and pacing in front of the chalkboard. "You know," he said, his voice taking on a thoughtful, lecturing tone that was far more sinister than his outright mockery. "This school has standards. We are trying to build a community of excellence." He stopped and looked directly at Amara, though he was speaking to the entire class. "But it's hard to maintain those standards when we have to accommodate everyone." The air in the room grew thick and heavy. The remaining smiles faded from the students' faces. They could sense the shift. This was no longer just about an accent. This was something darker. "We get students from all over," Mr. Douglas continued, his words slow and deliberate. "And I'm not saying they aren't welcome. But they need to adapt. They need to fit in. This is America. Real America." He gestured vaguely with his hand, as if to encompass the pristine walls of his classroom and the world outside. He was drawing a line, and he was placing Amara firmly on the other side of it. Amara stared down at her desk. She focused on a small scratch in the wood, a jagged line that looked like a tiny bolt of lightning. She poured all of her attention into that scratch, trying to make it the only thing in her world. If she could just focus on the scratch, she wouldn't have to feel the sting of his words. But they seeped in anyway, like poison. "Honestly," Mr. Douglas said with a sigh of theatrical frustration, "I don't know who even let you in here. An advanced class is for advanced students, students who can speak right. Students whose parents belong." The implication hung in the air, ugly and sharp. He was talking about her family, her origins, her very right to exist in this space. He suggested, without saying it directly, that she was a charity case, a diversity admission that was dragging everyone else down. "Maybe the school should think about that," he mused aloud. "Maybe we should kick out the ones who can't keep up." The classroom was utterly silent now, the kind of silence that is loud with unspoken things. Shock, discomfort, fear. No one dared to move. No one dared to breathe. They were all trapped in this bubble of cruelty, and Mr. Douglas was the only one with the pin. Amara's hand, which was resting on her lap, clenched around the simple plastic pencil she was holding. She squeezed it tighter and tighter, her knuckles turning a stark white against her dark skin. She could feel the cheap plastic groaning under the pressure. She imagined it snapping, the sharp crack echoing in the silent room. It was the only way she could channel the storm of fury and humiliation that was raging inside her. She kept her eyes lowered, her expression carefully blank, but inside a volcano was erupting. Outside the classroom, just beyond the door where the principal had stood moments before, another student was watching. Her name was Lily Carter. She was supposed to be heading to the library, but she had stopped when she heard the teacher's raised voice. She had seen the whole thing. She saw Amara flinch. She heard the ugly words. She saw the other students laugh, and then fall silent. And as she stood there, hidden from view, a wave of hot, sick guilt washed over her. She was one of them. She hadn't laughed, but she hadn't done anything either. She was just another silent face in the crowd. The narrator's voice would tell us here that the deepest wounds aren't always physical. The damage of humiliation, of being publicly shamed and stripped of your dignity, leaves scars that no one can see. It was an abuse of power, plain and simple, a teacher using his position to wound a child. And the silence of the other adults, the cowardice of those who could have stopped it, was a betrayal all its own. Lily Carter felt that betrayal in her own heart, and a small, hard knot of resolve began to form in her stomach. She turned away from the door. The image of Amara's white-knuckled grip on that pencil burned into her mind. The girl who sat trembling in that classroom was not who they thought she was. To Mr. Douglas, she was an easy target. To her classmates, she was the quiet new girl. But Amara Brooks was living a secret, one that was far bigger than this small, mean classroom. A few months earlier, in a world that felt a million miles away, Amara had stood in a grand, sunlit room in Washington, D.C. The room was filled with important people in dark suits, the air buzzing with quiet importance. Her father, Daniel Brooks, stood before them, his hand raised as he took an oath. He was a tall man, with a presence that filled a room not with noise, but with a deep, steady calm. He was a lawyer, a diplomat, a man who had worked his way up from a poor neighborhood in Atlanta to the highest echelons of power. And on that day, he had been officially appointed as the new United States ambassador to a major European nation. He was Ambassador Brooks, a man with immense, unseen power, a man who could, if he chose to, pick up a secure phone and speak directly to the most powerful people in the world. After the ceremony, away from the cameras and the handshakes, Daniel had pulled Amara into a quiet office. He knelt down, so was at her level, his warm, strong hands on her shoulders. "This is going to be a big change, sweetheart," he had told her, his voice soft but firm. "There will be a lot of attention on us, on me, and I want to protect you from that for as long as possible." They had made a plan together. The embassy post was in a country known for its aggressive press. Daniel didn't want his daughter's face splashed across newspapers, her every move scrutinized. He wanted her to have a normal life, or as normal as she could. So they decided she would stay in the U.S. For her first year of high school, living with a trusted family friend, she would enroll in a public school, not a fancy private academy, and to keep her identity completely under wraps, she would use her mother's maiden name. She wouldn't be Amara Brooks, daughter of the ambassador. She would just be Amara, a regular kid. Daniel Brooks was a black millionaire, a man who had achieved incredible success, but he had never forgotten where he came from. He was determined to keep his daughter grounded, to instill in her the values of humility and resilience. In their quiet moments together, he would share stories of his own childhood, of the obstacles he had faced and overcome. He taught her that wealth and status were tools, not measures of a person's character. One evening, shortly before she left to start her new life, they sat on the porch of their home, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight. "Listen to me, Amara," he had said, his voice serious. "People are going to judge you. They will judge you for how you look, for how you talk, for what they think they know about you. Don't ever let their judgment become your reality." He looked her straight in the eye. "Stay humble, be kind, but never, ever let them decide your worth. You know who you are. That's all that matters." It was this promise, this deep-seated need to protect her father's mission and their family's privacy, that kept Amara silent in that classroom. As Mr. Douglas's cruel words rained down on her, a part of her wanted to scream the truth. A part of her wanted to stand up and say, "My father is an ambassador. He could have you fired with a single phone call." But she bit her tongue. She thought of her father's face, of his gentle warning. She thought of the sacrifices he had made, and so she endured the humiliation. She held the secret tight within her, a shield and a burden all at once. The world saw a powerless girl, but hidden inside was the daughter of a giant, waiting for the right moment to stand tall. The bell finally rang, its shrill cry shattering the tension in the room. It was a release. Students scrambled out of their seats, their movements jerky and hurried, desperate to escape the toxic air of the classroom. Amara remained frozen for a moment longer, the echo of the laughter still ringing in her ears. She felt a profound sense of shame, a hot, sticky feeling that clung to her skin. It was the shame of being singled out, of being made to feel small and worthless. But underneath the shame, there was fear. Fear that this wouldn't be the last time. Fear that Mr. Douglas had marked her, that he would continue to use her as his personal punching bag. And tangled up with it all was a fierce, protective loyalty to her father. Telling him would mean breaking her promise. It would mean bringing a storm down on their carefully constructed, quiet life. It could create a diplomatic incident, a scandal that would distract from his important work. The weight of it all felt crushing. She packed her books slowly, her movements stiff, avoiding the pitying glances of the few classmates who lingered. At lunch, she found a secluded corner of the bustling cafeteria, a place where she could be invisible. She unwrapped her sandwich, but couldn't bring herself to eat. The food tasted like ash in her mouth. She just sat there, staring at the wall, replaying the morning's events over and over in her mind. A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. She would not cry. Not here. Not where anyone could see. Meanwhile, in the teacher's lounge, Mr. Douglas was holding court. He refilled his coffee mug, a smug grin plastered on his face. "You should have seen it," he said to Mr. Anderson, the gym teacher, who was slumped on a worn sofa. "This new girl from down south talking like she just fell off a turnip truck. I had to set her straight." He chuckled, a self-satisfied, rumbling sound. "I swear, some of these kids, they're just charity cases. The school has to take them to fill a quota or something. It brings down the whole level of the class." Mr. Anderson just grunted, not really listening. But another teacher, Mrs. Gable from the English department, looked over with a frown. She didn't like Mr. Douglas's tone, but she, like Principal Harris, knew he was a loud and vindictive man. She chose to stay silent, turning back to her papers. Mr. Douglas didn't notice. He was high on his own petty power, enjoying the feeling of being the one who sets people straight. That night, the weight on Amara's chest felt heavier than ever. She lay in her bed, the phone in her hand, her thumb hovering over her father's contact picture. It was a photo of them from last summer, both of them grinning, the sun lighting up their faces. She missed him so much it was a physical ache. She finally pressed the call button. He picked up on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar, even through the thousands of miles of ocean that separated them. "Hey, sweetheart. How's my favorite girl?" Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him everything. She wanted to pour out all the hurt and humiliation, and let him make it better, the way he always did when she was little. But the words wouldn't come. "Hi, Daddy," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Everything's fine." Daniel Brooks had been a diplomat for years. He was an expert at reading nuances, at hearing the words that weren't being said. He could sense the slight tremor in her voice, the forced brightness. A little warning bell went off in his mind. "Just fine?" he asked gently. "School going okay? You settling in?" "Yeah, it's okay," she lied. "Just a lot of homework." She couldn't do it. She couldn't burden him. He was dealing with international trade agreements and delicate political negotiations. Her problems with a mean teacher felt so small in comparison. Daniel paused. He knew something was wrong. His instinct, his paternal core, screamed at him to push, to demand she tell him what was bothering her. But he also knew his daughter. She was strong and independent, and he had raised her to be that way. Pushing too hard might make her shut down completely. He had to trust her. "All right, sweetheart," he said, his voice full of a love she could feel across the continents. "But you know you can tell me anything, right? Anything at all. I'm always here for you." "I know, Daddy," she whispered, a fresh wave of tears threatening to spill. I love you more," he replied. "Get some sleep." They hung up, and Amara buried her face in her pillow, the silence of her room feeling vast and lonely. The narrator's voice would lean in here, a co-conspirator to the audience. "She's no ordinary girl," it would say. "She holds a power she doesn't even want to use. But the world keeps pushing. How long can she hide it before the truth explodes?" The question hung in the air, a promise of the storm to come. The next day, the memory of Mr. Douglas's classroom was a gray cloud hanging over the school. For most students, it had already faded, just another uncomfortable moment in a long school week. But not for Lily Carter. She couldn't shake it. As she sat in her own morning classes, her pen doodling aimlessly in the margins of her notebook, her mind kept replaying the scene. She saw Amara's frozen posture. She heard the sneering tone of Mr. Douglas's voice. Most vividly, she remembered the sight of Amara's white-knuckled grip on that pencil. A small, silent act of defiance in a sea of humiliation. The guilt from the day before had settled into a hard, uncomfortable knot in her stomach. It was the guilt of a bystander, the guilt of knowing something was wrong and doing nothing. She wasn't a confrontational person. She preferred to blend in, to not make waves. But her conscience was screaming at her. It told her that silence was a choice. And yesterday she had chosen wrong. She knew she had to do something. She had to at least try to make it right. At lunchtime, she scanned the crowded cafeteria, her eyes searching for Amara. She finally spotted her at the same secluded table as the day before, sitting alone, picking at her food, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. Lily picked up her tray and walked over. "Hi," she said softly. "Is this seat taken?" Amara looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. She seemed to brace herself, as if expecting another attack. "No," she said quietly. Lily sat down, her heart thumping. "I'm Lily," she said, pushing her tray forward slightly. "We're in Mr. Douglas's class together." Amara just nodded, her gaze dropping back to her plate. "Look," Lily blurted out, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry about yesterday. What Mr. Douglas did was, it was awful. It was so wrong. And I'm sorry I just sat there and didn't say anything." Amara looked up again, a flicker of something surprise, gratitude in her eyes. "It's okay," she murmured, though her voice lacked conviction. "You don't have to apologize." "Yes, I do," Lily insisted, her own voice gaining a bit of strength. Everyone was just quiet. And that made it worse. He shouldn't be allowed to talk to people like that. Amara gave a small, sad smile. "He's the teacher," she said, a hint of resignation in her tone. "What can you do?" She was still trying to keep the peace, to not make a fuss. "It's fine, really." But Lily refused to let it go. "No, it's not fine," she said firmly. "We should do something. We could go to the principal." Amara's eyes widened in alarm. "No, please, don't. That will just make it worse. I just want to be left alone." The fear in Amara's voice was real. She was still committed to her silence, still protecting her secret. Lily could see she was hitting a wall, but her resolve didn't waver. She knew pushing Amara now would only scare her off. "Okay," she said, changing her approach. "Okay, I won't. But if you need anything, I'm here." Later that day, Lily was walking past Mr. Douglas's classroom again on her way to the library. The door was ajar, and she heard his voice, loud and pompous as ever. He was talking to another teacher, who was leaning against the doorframe, peeking through the crack. Lily saw him shake his head with a look of mock pity. "I'm telling you," Mr. Douglas was saying, "the girl can't even put a proper sentence together. It's a real shame what's happening to our schools." A cold anger rose in Lily's chest. He was still at it, still bad-mouthing Amara to anyone who would listen. Acting on a sudden, bold impulse, Lily pulled out her phone. She quickly navigated to the voice memo app, her fingers fumbling slightly. She held the phone low by her side, angling the microphone toward the open door, and pressed record. She caught the tail end of his rant. "It's not my fault her background is lacking. My job is to teach history, not basic English. Some people just aren't cut out for this level of education." The other teacher chuckled weakly and moved on. Mr. Douglas went back into his classroom. Lily stopped the recording, her heart pounding. She had it. She had proof. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was his own voice, his own prejudice, captured and saved. The narrator would frame this moment as a turning point. Lily Carter was not a hero with a grand plan. She was just an ordinary person who saw an injustice and decided she could no longer be a part of the silence. She chose courage, and in doing so she had just armed the silent girl with a weapon she didn't even know she needed. Mr. Douglas was a man drunk on his own small power. The lack of any consequences for his public humiliation of Amara had only emboldened him. He felt untouchable. In his mind, he hadn't done anything wrong. He had simply maintained the high standards of his classroom. He began to treat Amara with a new kind of open disdain. He wouldn't call on her anymore, effectively rendering her invisible. When he walked past her desk, he would make a subtle, theatrical sniffing sound, as if she gave off a bad odor. He would make general pointed comments to the class about the importance of proper grooming and coming to school looking presentable, his eyes flicking toward Amara's simple, clean but second-hand clothes. The classroom became a minefield for her. Each day a new exercise in bracing for the next small, sharp jab. The other students noticed. They exchanged uncomfortable glances. But Mr. Douglas's confidence was a shield that no one dared to try and penetrate. He felt so secure that he began bragging to his colleagues in the hallways and the teacher's lounge. He saw himself as a brave truth-teller, a guardian against the declining standards he imagined were flooding the school. "You have to be firm with kids like her," he was overheard saying to the football coach. "If you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. You have to put them in their place right from the start, or they'll walk all over you." He painted himself as the victim, a dedicated educator forced to deal with an underprepared student who was wasting his valuable time. He was creating his own narrative, one in which he was the hero and she was the problem. After school, Lily found Amara by the lockers, packing her bag for the day. Her movements were slow, her shoulders slumped. The weight she was carrying was visible to anyone who cared to look. Lily's heart ached for her. "Amara," she said softly. Approaching her, Amara looked up, her expression guarded. Since their conversation at lunch, a fragile, unspoken alliance had formed between them. Amara was still wary, but she no longer saw Lily as a threat. I have something to show you," Lily said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She glanced around the mostly empty hallway, then pulled out her phone. "Or something for you to hear," she explained quickly what she had done, how she had recorded Mr. Douglas talking about her outside his classroom. She held out the phone. "I don't know if it's useful," Lily said, "but I thought you should have it. What he's doing isn't right." Amara hesitated for a moment, then took the phone. Lily pressed play. Mr. Douglas's voice filled the small space between them, clear and condescending. "It's not my fault her background is lacking. My job is to teach history, not basic English. Some people just aren't cut out for this level of education." Amara listened, her face impassive, but as the recording finished, something inside her shifted. It was one thing to endure the humiliation in the moment. It was another to hear it played back, cold and undeniable. It was proof. It was validation that she wasn't just being sensitive. This was real. This was a man with a deep-seated prejudice, who was using his position to hurt her. She handed the phone back to Lily. "Thank you," she said, and for the first time, her voice was not timid or shaky. It was quiet, but it was hard. It was the sound of something solidifying. A resolve was hardening within her, like steel being forged in a fire. The seeds of a plan she didn't even know she was capable of, began to sprout in the barren ground of her despair. The girl who just wanted to be left alone was starting to realize that the only way to get peace was to go to war. That evening, the quiet of her room felt different. It was no longer a lonely, vast space. It was a command center. Amara sat on her bed, the events of the past few days swirling in her mind. The laughter, the shame, the principal's cowardly retreat, Mr. Douglas's smug, cruel face, and then Lily's small act of courage. The recording, the undeniable proof, the memory of her father's voice, echoed in her head. "Never, ever let them decide your worth." She had been letting Mr. Douglas decide her worth. She had been letting her fear keep her silent, but she was her father's daughter. The humility he had taught her was not meant to be a doorway to humiliation. The strength he had instilled in her was not meant to be kept hidden forever. She picked up her phone. Her hand was steady, her thumb moved with purpose. She pressed the call button for her father's secure line. It rang twice. Before he answered, his voice professional and alert, the voice of a man in the middle of his workday. "Brooks. Daddy," she said, her own voice low and clear. "It's me. I need to tell you something." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Daniel Brooks immediately cleared his schedule. He swiveled his chair away from his desk, turning to face the window that overlooked a foreign city. He gave her his complete, undivided attention. "I'm listening, Amara," he said, his tone shifting from the busy ambassador to the concerned father. "Tell me everything." And she did. The words poured out of her, a torrent of pain and frustration that had been dammed up for days. She told him about Miss Douglas's mockery of her accent, about the laughter from the class. She told him about comments on her family and real America. She told him about the principal walking away, about the constant little jabs, about feeling invisible and targeted all at once. She told him about Lily's kindness and the recording on her phone. She left nothing out. Daniel Brooks listened. He listened in a way that few people could. He was a trained diplomat, skilled at absorbing information, at detecting undercurrents and hidden meanings. But now, he was not a diplomat. He was a father, and as he listened to his daughter's story, a cold, hard fury began to build inside him. It was a quiet fury, not a hot, explosive one. It was the anger of a protective parent whose child had been deeply wounded. He imagined the scene in that classroom, his intelligent, gentle daughter being torn down by a petty, prejudiced man. He imagined her sitting alone at lunch, her spirit bruised. His face remained calm, a mask of professional composure, but inside a storm was gathering. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "I am so sorry that you had to go through that alone. I didn't want to bother you," she whispered. "You are never a bother, Amara," he said, his voice firm as granite. "You are the most important thing in the world to me. You did the right thing by telling me." He comforted her, reassured her, and promised her that this would be dealt with. He told her how proud he was of her strength and her courage. After they hung up, Daniel Brooks sat in his office, the silence of the room a stark contrast to the tempest inside him. He did not yell, he did not throw things. His anger was a tool, and he was going to wield it with precision. He picked up his phone and made a single quiet call. It was not to the school, it was not to the principal, it was to a private number he had in his contacts. The phone was answered on the first ring. Helen Grant. She was the chairwoman of the Board of Education for that entire school district, a powerful and no-nonsense woman he had met at a diplomatic function months earlier. "Helen, this is Daniel Brooks," he said, his voice calm and level, betraying none of the rage he felt. "I apologize for the late call. I find myself in need of scheduling a meeting regarding an urgent matter at one of your schools. It concerns a personnel issue." He stated the facts, simply, without threat or embellishment. He didn't need the weight of his title, the seriousness of his tone. It was all that was needed. The narrator would pause here, letting the tension hang. Sometimes it would say, "The loudest threats are the ones that are never shouted." Sometimes it only takes one quiet call from the right person to change everything. The next morning, an official-looking email landed in Mr. Kent Douglas's inbox. The subject line was bland, "Invitation to routine review meeting." The body of the email was brief and formal. It requested his presence at the District Board of Education offices the following afternoon for a routine performance review and discussion of classroom conduct. Mr. Douglas read it with a self-satisfied smirk. A review. He had been angling for a promotion, a position as head of the history department. This had to be it. They had finally noticed his dedication, his commitment to high standards. His overconfidence was a blinding force, preventing him from seeing any possibility of trouble. He puffed out his chest and walked down to the teacher's lounge, the email practically burning a hole in his pocket. "You'll never guess what," he announced to Mrs. Gable, who was making tea. "The Board of Education just summoned me. Looks like all my hard work is finally paying off. They're probably talking about my promotion." Mrs. Gable offered a tight, non-committal smile. "Congratulations, Kent." But a small knot of unease tightened in her stomach. Routine reviews from the Board of Education were, in fact, anything but routine. They were rare, and they usually meant trouble. At the same time, a different kind of message arrived in Principal Harris's office. It wasn't an email. It was a hand-delivered memo, sealed in a district office envelope. The message inside was even more cryptic than the one Mr. Douglas had received. It commanded his attendance at the same meeting. It gave no reason, no context, just a time and a place. The principal read it twice, a cold sweat breaking out on his brow. This was highly irregular. His mind immediately flew back to the incident in Mr. Douglas's classroom, to the laughter he had heard, to the humiliated girl he had seen, to the way he had turned and walked away. A sense of deep foreboding settled over him. He had a terrible feeling that his deliberate inaction was about to have very deliberate consequences. The school day continued as normal on the surface, but an undercurrent of tension began to ripple through the staff. Whispers started. Why was Mr. Douglas called to the district office? Why the principal too? Students, with their keen sense for adult anxiety, could sense that something was off. They saw the worried look on the principal's face, and the smug arrogance of Mr. Douglas. No one knew what was coming, but the stage was being set for a reckoning that would shake the very foundations of the school. The following afternoon, Mr. Kent Douglas walked into the district office building with a confident stride. He had worn his best tie for the occasion. He imagined the conversation, the praise for his methods, The offer of a new title and a bigger office. He checked in at the front desk and was directed to a large conference room on the top floor. He pushed open the heavy wooden door, a practiced, humble smile already on his face. And then he froze. The smile evaporated. The color drained from his face. The room was not empty, waiting for his grand arrival. It was already occupied. Seated around the polished mahogany table were the senior members of the Board of Education, their faces grim and unsmiling. At the head of the table sat the chairwoman herself, Helen Grant, a woman with eyes that could cut through steel. Standing by her side, looking out the window with his back to the door, was a tall, impeccably dressed black man who radiated an aura of quiet, unshakable authority. And standing stiffly by the wall, looking pale and terrified, was Principal Harris. Mr. Douglas's smugness shattered like glass. A chilling stillness fell over him. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The man by the window turned around slowly. His gaze was calm, but it carried an intensity that made Mr. Douglas feel like he was shrinking. He didn't recognize the man at first, but there was something familiar about his strong, dignified features. Helen Grant broke the silence, her voice cold and sharp. "Mr. Doug, thank you for joining us. Please have a seat." It was not a request, it was an order. Mr. Douglas stumbled toward the empty chair, his legs suddenly feeling weak. He sank into it, his eyes darting between the stone-faced board members, the terrified principal, and the imposing stranger. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of the scene. A promotion. This felt more like an execution. It was then that another door opened, and two more figures stepped into the room. The first was Amara. She was not wearing her usual hand-me-down clothes. She was dressed in a simple but elegant dress, her hair neatly styled. She stood tall, her chin held high. Beside her was Lily Carter, who looked nervous but determined. Mr. Douglas stared at Amara, and in that instant, looking from her face to the face of the powerful man standing beside the chairwoman, the horrifying truth crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. The resemblance was undeniable. The same steady eyes, the same strong jawline, the same quiet dignity. He finally understood. He finally realized who she was. And he realized the colossal career-ending mistake he had made. The blood rushed from his head, and the room seemed to tilt on its axis. The narrator would savor this moment, the delicious, stomach-dropping tension of a bully finally facing a power far greater than his own. In that moment, the narrator would say, the world rearranged itself. In that moment, the mighty felt very, very small, and the silent, the girl he had tried to crush, had finally found her voice. Mr. Douglas looked at the man, who now held his gaze, and he knew, with sickening certainty, that his life was about to change forever. "For the record," Chairwoman Helen Grant began, her voice devoid of any warmth, "this meeting is being held to address a series of serious allegations against Mr. Kent Douglas, a teacher at Northwood High." She gestured toward the tall man beside her. "This is Ambassador Daniel Brooks. I believe, Mr. Douglas, that you are acquainted with his daughter, Amara." Ambassador Brooks did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He spoke with a calm, measured precision that was more intimidating than any shouting could ever be. "Miss Douglas," he began, "over the past week you have engaged in a campaign of targeted harassment and humiliation against my daughter." He laid out the facts, one by one, like a prosecutor building an irrefutable case. "You mocked her accent in front of her peers. You made derogatory comments about her background and insinuated that she and her family do not belong in what you call real America. You have subjected her to public ridicule and emotional distress, abusing your position of authority as an educator." Mr. Douglas opened his mouth to protest, to deny, to explain. "Now that's not." He started to bluster. "You will be silent," Helen Grant snapped, her voice like a whip crack. Mr. Douglas flinched as if he'd been slapped, and his mouth snapped shut. The power in the room was absolute, and none of it belonged to him. Ambassador Brooks continued, his calm never wavering. "My daughter wished for no special treatment. She wished only to be a student, to learn. You, however, chose to single her out. You chose to make her a target." He then nodded toward Lily. "Thankfully, not all of your students share your lack of moral character. Miss Carter, if you would, Lily, her hands trembling slightly, stepped forward and placed her phone on the polished table. "I recorded this outside Miss Douglas's classroom," she said, her voice small but clear. She pressed play. Mr. Douglas's own voice filled the silent room, smug and condescending. "It's not my fault her background is lacking. My job is to teach history, not basic English. Some people just aren't cut out for this level of education." The recording ended, leaving a heavy, damning silence in its wake. The faces of the board members were masks of cold fury. Principal Harris looked at the floor, his face ashen with shame. He knew his own complicity was now laid bare for all to see. Then the most powerful moment of all occurred. Amara stepped forward. She stood beside her father, not behind him. She was no longer the shrinking, timid girl from the classroom. She looked directly at the board members, her voice steady and strong. "He made me feel like I was nothing," she said. "He made me feel ashamed of who I am and where I come from. A teacher is supposed to build you up. He tried to tear me down. And the worst part was that everyone just watched." The entire room listened, their jaws slack with shock and awe. They were not just seeing the ambassador's daughter, they were seeing a young woman of incredible strength and composure. A girl who had been through a fire and had come out forged into something stronger. The power shift was complete and total. The black girl they had all underestimated, the one Miss Douglas had mocked and tried to erase, now stood as the most powerful person in the room, backed by her father's authority, Lily's courage, and the undeniable weight of the truth. Mr. Douglas could only stare, his world crumbling around him. The silence that followed Amara's statement was heavy and absolute. It was broken by Helen Grant, the board chairwoman. She looked down at the file in front of her, then looked up, her eyes fixing on Mr. Douglas, with a gaze as cold and hard as a winter morning. "Mr. Douglas," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "The Board of Education has a zero-tolerance policy for harassment, discrimination, and the kind of gross misconduct you have displayed. Your actions are a disgrace to this profession." She didn't consult with the other board members. The decision had clearly already been made. Effective immediately, she announced, each word a hammer blow. "Your employment with this school district is terminated. You are fired." The word hung in the air. Fired. Mr. Douglas's face went from pale to a ghastly ashen gray. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. His entire life, his identity, his smug superiority, it was all gone. In a single sentence, he had been reduced to nothing. He was no longer the mighty teacher. He was just an unemployed man who had made a terrible, terrible mistake. The chairwoman then turned her icy gaze upon Principal Harris, who visibly flinched. "Mr. Harris," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "A leader's first duty is to protect his students. You were aware of this situation. You heard the abuse with your own ears and saw it with your own eyes, and you chose to walk away. Your silence makes you complicit." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "You will be immediately demoted from your position as principal. You will be reassigned to an administrative role in the district basement, where you will have no contact with students. Consider yourself lucky to still have a job at all." Finally, Helen Grant's expression softened as she looked at Lily. "Miss Carter," she said, a hint of warmth finally entering her voice. "What you did took immense courage. You stood up for what was right when the adults around you failed to do so. You are a credit to this school and to this community. Thank you." Lily blushed, a small, proud smile touching her lips. The scene was one of stunning, swift justice. Everyone in the room was frozen, watching the downfall of one man and the cowardice of another being punished. Mr. Douglas just sat there speechless, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated shock. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by a hollow, vacant stare. Regret, thick and suffocating, painted the faces of the board members who had for years ignored complaints about this very teacher. The narrator's voice would capture the raw emotion of the moment, focusing on the physical reactions. Stunned, jaws dropped. The mighty had fallen, brought down not by a roar but by a whisper of truth. Regret was a bitter taste in the mouths of every person who had once laughed, or who had once looked away. Justice had arrived, and it was swift, silent, and absolute. Mr. Douglas was no longer a petty tyrant. He was a forgotten man, a footnote in a story about a girl he had catastrophically underestimated. The meeting was over. The board members filed out of the room, leaving the wreckage behind. Mr. Douglas remained in his chair, a man hollowed out, staring into the abyss of his own creation. Principal Harris, now a principal in name only, slunk out of the room without making eye contact with anyone. In the hallway outside the conference room, the air was still thick with tension. Ambassador Brooks turned to his daughter. The formidable diplomat, the man of immense power, disappeared. In his place was just a father. He wrapped his arms around Amara, pulling her into a tight, fierce hug. He held her for a long moment, simply breathing her in, reassuring himself that she was okay. He rested his chin on the top of her head. "I am so proud of you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You were so strong in there. You were braver than anyone in that room." Amara leaned into him, the strength she had projected in the meeting finally giving way to the relief of a child in her father's arms. She felt the tension drain out of her shoulders, the hard knot of fear and shame finally dissolving. The hug was more than just comfort, it was a validation. It was a father's love, a powerful, unshakable force that had crossed an ocean to protect her. It was the ultimate statement that she was worthy, she was loved, and she was safe. A few students who were in the hallway on their way to late-day activities stopped and stared. They saw the scene. The fired teacher being escorted out by security, the demoted principal scurrying away, and the quiet new girl being embraced by this powerful, dignified man. The whispers started instantly, the truth spreading through the school like wildfire. They were no longer seeing Amara, the poor girl with the funny accent. They were seeing Amara Brooks, a girl of incredible courage, a girl who had stood up to a bully and won. They were seeing her not for her father's title, but for the strength she had shown all on her own. The power of a father's love had given her the shield she needed, but it was her own dignity that had become her sword. In the days that followed, the entire culture of the school began to shift. The story of what happened in that boardroom became a legend, whispered in hallways and discussed in hushed tones in the cafeteria. Amara was no longer invisible. She was no longer the target. When she walked down the hall, students didn't look at her with pity or disdain. They looked at her with a newfound respect, and maybe even a little bit of awe. The secret of her father's identity was out, but it was her own actions that defined her. Students saw that her power wasn't in her name, but in her voice. She had spoken truth to power, and she had won. Amara, no longer needing to hide or make herself small, began to blossom. A quiet confidence settled around her. She started to participate in class discussions, her voice, with its soft southern cadence, now clear and steady. She no longer feared the sound of it. It was her voice, and it was worthy of being heard. Lily and Amara became inseparable. Their bond, forged in a moment of shared justice, grew into a deep and genuine friendship. They ate lunch together every day, no longer in a secluded corner, but right in the middle of the cafeteria. They were a testament to the power of courage and alliance. The quiet power of Ambassador Daniel Brooks was recognized, a silent, formidable force that had righted a wrong, but it was Amara's courage that had sparked the real change. She had shown everyone that you didn't need a powerful title to demand respect. You just needed to believe in your own worth. The story concludes, with the narrator's final moral resonating over images of Amara laughing with her new friends, confident and happy. Never let anyone decide your worth. Your value is not determined by their judgment, their prejudice, or their ignorance. Power can be hidden in the quietest of people, and wealth can be measured in more than just money. But truth, dignity, and courage can never stay silent forever. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.